Hello and welcome to Edinburgh Skeptics Lockdown. I'm here tonight with Carmen D'Cruz and we're going to learn about critical thinking and race. Carmen is going to be the first of our speakers for our mini fringe run that we're doing as we can't do anything in person during this strange time. So Carmen is talking to us tonight about critical thinking and race. Next week we have Professor John Curtis from the BBC talking to us about the polling of independence movement and whether that's shifting. And then on the third week, a person I'm most excited about is Emma Bryant, and she's the expert on Cambridge Analytica. She's who Carol Cadwalladr gets her information from, and she's been studying them since the beginning. So she's going to be talking to us about them and academia and what role academia played in that sort of scandal and what reflections should be made about that. So I'm very excited about that one. But tonight we're going to talk more about race. Also, if you would normally donate to us, if you were coming to see us live, and you want to continue that tradition, we do have a PayPal for the Free Fringe, the PBH Free Fringe, which is what we'd normally run our events on. And in fact, we did have Carmen booked to be our comedy night, fundraiser night for July last month for our Free Fringe run. So she was going to be coming down as a comedian, but unfortunately, no, wasn't able to. So yes, if you want to donate to that, it's paypal.me/freefringe, and there'll be a link at the bottom during each break and stuff. Also, if you want to ask a question and something pops into your head, if you get us on Twitter, Facebook, comments in YouTube, people monitoring them, everything will get through to us and we'll get through all the questions at the end. So for now, I'll hand you over to Carmen to learn more. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks so much, Heather. Hi, I'm Carmen D'Cruz. I'm going to do a proper intro in a sec. Thank you so much, Heather and the whole team at Edinburgh Skeptics for having me along today. I guess they thought they'd start with a nice easy topic, critical thinking and race. Hey! Oh, let me go to the right screen. Hopefully you can see my screen. Here we go. So a bit about what we're going to talk through today. So I'll do a little bit of an intro to me, and then we'll go through what is critical thinking, what is race, and then the past, present, and some hopeful, optimistic directions for the future. So a little bit about me. That's double me. Oh, hopefully you can see it there. Yeah, I'm from Croydon in South London originally. People ask me where I'm from all of the time. And for some reason, Croydon isn't a good enough answer, which is a shame because Croydon's amazing. I feel like they're missing out. I've been an event organiser and co-host of London Skeptics in the Pub for a really long time, about 12 years. I came into it kind of by accident. I had a really awful breakup and he was so horrible to me, and I just wanted to go and do a social thing that, you know, made me feel like I was clever again. And so I started going along to Skeptics in the Pub. Initially felt really out of my depth because everyone there seemed to be so clever. But actually everyone was really lovely to me, and it was just really such a welcoming environment, and I really haven't looked back. It's not an understatement to say that Skeptics in the Pub changed my life, and I love it to pieces, and some of the things that have happened to it in the last few years have been quite sad, but hopefully with people like the team in Edinburgh, and there's other Skeptics in the Pub groups around the country as well who are trying to make the whole movement a much better place, particularly in the UK. So I'm really glad to be part of that. Yeah, my family are Indian which also explains why people are never satisfied that Croydon is where I'm from originally. But yeah, we'll get to that in a bit, I guess. So Croydon, if you don't know it, you might recognise some aspects of it from Batman. It's often treated as a dystopian backdrop because of its brutalist architecture. Myself, I class myself as working class, queer, cis woman of colour. I am an activist along anti-racism, LGBTQ rights and disability rights as well more recently. And I'm passionate about lots of things pretty much. Here are a couple of theories that, about racism that I've kind of developed partly myself and then partly influenced by a lot of things that are discussed online. So the first one is it's interesting to consider who race actually applies to. It's not really something that you would choose for yourself. It's something that is put on you by someone else. I don't wake up in the morning and think, God, I love being from Croydon. I mean, I do, but it's not. It's something that me being a non-white person is something that is pushed onto me as part of my identity, rather than something that I feel intrinsically myself. And then thinking about how that has affected the way that I've moved through my life since I was a child, since I was first othered. That also made me think about what it must be like to be considered the default, to automatically belong, and how painful that might be if you're from any other marginalised group as well, where you might look like you belong, but actually you don't. And I'm learning more and more about that through the disability activism that I do, which is just fascinating to me, and yeah, something that we can all do better at fixing. And then the next bit is the definition of racism. I think it's suited discussions on racism historically to treat it as something that is an individual, deliberate act, whereas if you think about it more as a system-wide thing, it becomes a lot easier to pick apart why, say, black people are more disproportionately stopped by the police, or there's also why people of colour have been disproportionately affected by coronavirus. I should probably also mention a quick content note that I will be getting into some quite horrible aspects of racism, and I'm going to try and move through them really quickly, because ultimately what I'd like is for us to go away at the end of this with kind of an understanding of what we can do within our own spheres to help tackle it. So yes, just a bit of a content note there, but hopefully you were expecting that anyway. So, oh yeah, definitely trigger warning for the next slide. This is a picture of Donald Trump. And a quote from him saying, "I'm probably the least racist person in the world," which I don't think that's possible for many reasons. But it's nice that he at least thinks that. I'd be interested to have a conversation with him and find out what he means by that. I think that would be I don't know if I might find it quite tiring, but it might be quite interesting how he thinks of himself as being a non-racist person. And there's another quote underneath that by a writer called Ibram X. Kendi, who's absolutely fantastic. And if anyone wants copies of this presentation, I'm very happy to send it out, because in the notes I've put links to some of the people that I've quoted and their work, and then just some general further reading. So please do reach out to me after the talk, or to Edinburgh Skeptics team, and I'm very happy to send a copy of the presentation. So Ibram X. Kendi says the heartbeat of racism is denial, and what I think he means by this, what I've understood by what he means by this, is that if you are working within a racist system but you don't want to address it, it's so much easier to deny that the racism exists, and it means you can get away with an awful lot. So, yeah, thank you, Edinburgh Skeptics, for picking such a delightful, easy topic. Here are some kittens. I'll put these throughout the whole presentation. Not these two kittens. I've got loads of them, because it's such a topic that I thought it'd be nice to break it up with some nice things. So, yes, I am a cat person, but don't worry, it's not just cats. So Ibram X. Kendi wrote a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, and he talks about two central points within that, how to actually do it. So the first one is to be able to see the racism around us and be honest about it in ourselves, which is really hard because it kind of conflicts with a core value that we have about ourselves as being good people. I do think that fundamentally most people are good. We all have good intentions. We all want to do the right thing. If we accidentally hurt someone, we don't, we want to stop doing that. Very few of us would gleefully hurt people. And if we do hurt people, who among us hasn't been involved in a Twitter mob at some point, we kind of justify it as, well, they started it. And I mean, whether that's fair or not, I think just being honest about when we hurt people, and trying to find a way to move through that internally is really, really useful, and one of the fundamental ways that you can start being anti-racist. And then from that, you'll be able to rebuild the world based on anti-racist principles. And I won't necessarily go into what all of those are now, because you should just buy his book, available from all good bookshops. And yeah, it's oh my gosh, this is really hot here. I'm just going to get my fan because it is so hot today. Right. So yeah, to rebuild the world on anti-racist principles. I won't get into it now because there's a lot in there, and it's a whole book's worth. It's a whole presentation's worth that isn't my field of interest. So buy his book, watch his videos. I've linked to them within this presentation as well. Right. Here's what we'll be doing. For those of you of a certain age, you will remember the BBC Bite-Size series. I don't know if it's still running, but it was absolutely amazing. And it's really informed how I learn things now, even as an adult in my mid-30s. So we'll take a statement down, we'll break it down into as many component parts as possible in order to get a better understanding. So reasons that this is a good approach is that we are able to take as many angles into it as possible in hopefully easier, more digestible chunks, hence the bite size. The weaknesses are that it's difficult to see the wood for the trees sometimes. You can get so bogged down in detail that it's really difficult to actually pass through it all. And it also means that I need to have a solid understanding of what my own biases are. And I'm going to try and be really open and honest with you about that. Which is why I made a point at the beginning of the talk of telling you like how I class myself. So being working class, queer, cis, like all of these things about me that are important to me, but that also could kind of be hiding some biases about how I'm going to approach things. So I would hope that everyone at home, wherever you are, would do the same thing when you're approaching this topic. In order to try and overcome those weaknesses, it's best for me to take a step back sometimes, particularly when things get stressful. And that is why there's cats, because this stuff can get so bogged down and so stressful because it really does interrupt with our core values when you suddenly discover that something you've been doing that has the most well-intentioned purpose or well-intentioned intent, when you suddenly find out that actually it's quite harmful. So yeah, take a step back, enjoy these cats. This is Bella and Amazing Narnia, and I've put a link to their Instagram. They're adorable cats. They just had a litter recently. Please follow them, they're wonderful. So, what is critical thinking? We love this topic at Skeptics in the Pub. Critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. Yeah, simples. There are so many definitions of critical thinking, but this is the one that I liked the most. I like this one particularly because it doesn't include the word rational. And I think that this is one of I think rationality and striving towards pure rationality at the expense of emotion is actually really dangerous for the skeptics movement. And I'll give some examples later on. But I think that I'd like to take a humanistic approach to critical thinking generally. And ask really basic questions. So when we talk about critical thinking, who is actually doing the thinking here? What are our biases or their biases? And how is everyone trying to stay as objective as possible? This gives us this opportunity to learn and change our views. But if we're not honest about what our biases are, then it means that we're not going to be able to actually change those views effectively, because we'll always have this blind spot. So
sorry, we seem to be having some technical issues. I think we've lost Carmen, so we may need to go to a holding screen for a while. Okay, now you can start. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your patience. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened there. I think my internet cut out. That's I don't want to get libelled, but yeah, let's say my internet provider isn't great. Anyway, definitions of critical thinking. I don't know where I actually cut out. So I guess one of the reasons I like this is that it doesn't include the word rational. I think critical thinking needs to be wider than that. I'd like to take a humanistic approach to critical thinking and ask who it is that's doing the thinking and what are their or our biases and what are we all doing collectively to stay objective. This is an opportunity for us to learn and change our views, but we're going to really struggle to do that if we're unaware of our own blind spots. So yeah, critical thinking. Here's some limitations of skepticism. And I didn't think when I first started going to Skeptics, I didn't think that that there are a few things on this list that I didn't think we'd still be discussing. And there are a couple of things that I wasn't expecting to be brought into Skeptics discussions. So climate denial, that seemed like it was obvious, right? that climate change was real, and yet here we are in 2020 still talking about it. We've got whole countries like Brazil who are still burning their forests down to make way for other stuff. And they're calling themselves skeptics. And I think we need to reclaim our title from them. Alternative medicine quacks. We used to make fun of them in quite a harsh way, and I've lost the interest in making fun of these people. They're really wrong. It's really dangerous, particularly right now. We're seeing a lot of alternative medicine and anti-vaxxer memes and Instagram influences and all sorts on the rise, which is particularly terrifying now. I've lost family to coronavirus, and the fact that there are people out there who are sharing anti-vax memes again, that's horrifying. The gender critical movement, who gets to define gender and what purpose does it serve? And I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. It's quite horrible to consider that some people that I used to think of as friends now identify as gender critical, which is, I think it's just a shame, and it's not a good use of critical thinking. They are otherwise so intelligent. Why would they want to start questioning people's right to live and be who they are? And then 5G masks and coronavirus, and you can see a lot of the similarities here between these conspiracy theories and the microwave conspiracy theory that Sean has given a talk about with Edinburgh. That's excellent if you haven't seen it. So here's another cat. This is Nune the cat, another famous Instagrammer. Look at the eyes, one blue and one yellow, just beautiful. So another easy topic, what is race? It's a social construct. Well, what does that mean? So social constructs are things where we have shared assumptions about the world. So they're likely to change, but they're generally behaviours and customs that are appropriate to things like gender, class, sexuality, race. You'd expect that if you identify with any one of these things, that you're going to act in a certain way sometimes, or you're more likely to wear jewellery more often. If you're a particular class, you might be more inclined to get employment in particular industries, all the rest of it. I had my dad is quite a normal bloke. He's a sportsman for a living. And I work in theatre. I'm a general manager at a theatre down in Brighton, and my theatre was on tour, and we happened to be going to a city that my dad lives in, so he came along to see the show, and I was a bit nervous because he's never actually met any of my colleagues before, and also most of my colleagues, or probably half of my colleagues, are trans or non-binary. So I was a bit apprehensive about him maybe misgendering them. I'd briefed him in advance and he didn't really get it. But, he's fundamentally a nice person. So, I was nervous, but actually it ended up being fine. We went for dinner after the show, which my dad absolutely loved. And while we were all sitting around at dinner, he was talking to some of the artists, including one of my colleagues who is non-binary. So they were basically going through step by step with my dad about how to get better at understanding non-binary and trans rights and issues that affect them particularly. So what they said to him was, you're born and then a doctor decides you're either one gender or another, you're assigned gender, and then that decision has an impact on the rest of your life. And then the discussion turned towards, well, who actually benefits from that classification? And this is felt quite keenly with my dad as a sportsman, because there are things that are acceptable for him to do that are not acceptable for, say, me to do, or certainly wasn't acceptable for me to do in the 80s. And also that would have had an impact on his sisters as well, who were both excellent hockey players too, but my dad was the one that actually progressed with it and carried on doing it for the rest of his life. So when you have these hierarchies and these things that are assigned to you, and these things that are pushed onto you, who does that actually benefit? What purpose does it serve? And it was really heartwarming to see my dad, a blokey bloke, that's a picture of him there, like really get it for the first time, and it was just really nice. So even when you think something is really complicated and outside of your remit to understand, it is still possible. And yeah, I'm just really proud of my dad for doing that. Applying that to race, so we've got good stereotypes, bad stereotypes, and then the values that are attached to that. So I've included a GIF here from Family Guy where Peter Griffin is talking to a stereotypically Asian kid. They're in front of a blackboard and Peter is poking the kid, and the caption underneath says, "Come on, do math." Obviously that should be maths, but this is an American GIF. So I'm really good at maths, and I'm not sure why I'm good at it. I just seem to have a decent head for numbers. I'm not the best at it, but it's a big part of what I do now in my day job. But not everyone is as lucky. So when you have these stereotypes, even when they're good, it can be really bad if you don't fit that stereotype. So, other people who are Asian, who are not good at maths, they really struggle. And it's a source of shame when other people assume that you must be good at something and then it turns out you're not. That's quite horrible, in a way that I don't think white people ever really get to experience that in the same way, unless they are also from another marginalised group. Also, with social constructs comes lots of opportunities that are afforded to you. So gender is the really easy one to point out. Like, if you're a man, there are certain things that are just naturally easier for you to get involved in because it is expected you do that. But then equally, there are other career paths that might be shut off to you, or that would be much harder for you to get into. And certainly you can get those jobs, but you might face a lot of criticism or like negative feedback from doing it. There's also the compound interest of opportunity or disbenefits that you would get across an entire lifetime because of these decisions that we are encouraged to make. And although it is possible to break out of those systems, it does add up over time. And yeah, just to hammer the point, race isn't something that we choose. Similar to gender, it's not something that we choose. It is something that is pushed onto us. And then I've also included, I thought this was quite funny, I didn't know that Charles Dickens invented the concept of gammon. So just something interesting little fact while I was doing my research for this. So next, race as a system. It's obviously hierarchical. Like that's the point of racism, right? It's to set a hierarchy up so that we have in-groups and we have out-groups. And then there's certain things within that hierarchy that make it really obvious how much proximity to power you have, and then following on from that, an expectation of what will be like. So I've included, this is my actual CV that hasn't been updated in some time, but this is my actual CV here, and you can have a skim through it, but you don't have to read it. Basically, I'm really professional, and I've got a very European sounding name. I have never struggled to get job interviews, or even to get the job once I've got the interview. I'm at the point now in my career, kind of mid-senior management, that I have all of the markers of people who, that someone would expect someone like me to have. So there's an expectation when I go into an interview, maybe less so now with my green hair, but there is an expectation of me when I go into an interview of the kind of person that I'm going to be like. And it's never really a surprise that I'm Asian, even though it doesn't appear anywhere on my CV. I guess with the list of experience that I've got, it's all data and tech and a bit of healthcare. So yeah, there's some stereotypes that kind of work in my favor a bit, and that expectation that has worked in my favour for the sort of jobs that I do, but absolutely don't work in the favour for other people. Like if you've got an African name, there's been loads of studies, if you've got an African sounding name, then you're more likely to not even be shortlisted for interview. So I don't think that people who are selecting CVs are doing this deliberately. I don't think they're kind of rubbing their hands with glee, like, who can we piss off today? I think it's just a bit of a blind spot that they have. I really don't think that it's a conscious thing. Maybe it is for some people, but I don't think that's the case for the majority of hiring managers. It is just a blind spot that has seeped its way into all levels of an organisation. So we've kind of discussed this already, but what's the point of race? So we talked about hierarchies, and it's classic divide and conquer tactics. I've used the word intersections here because it is a good word to describe what it is. But when you have things that are more complicated, like where, say, race and class come in, or race and gender come in. So Kimberly Crenshaw wrote in the 1980s, there was a case in 1976 of some African-American women who had tried to get a job at General Motors, and they were refused because they had African-Americans working in the actual factory floor, but all the secretaries were white, who were also women. That it meant that there were no job opportunities for black women. And so the judge dismissed it because obviously General Motors wasn't racist because they were hiring black men. And it's that the judge hadn't taken into account the intersectionality of gender and race. So yeah, it makes it easier to dismiss when you're just bringing race in. If you can dismiss those intersections. It makes it easier to pit working class and middle class people of colour against each other. I've given two examples here, Priti Patel and Sean Bailey, who's a Conservative candidate for London Mayor. This just happened in the news yesterday, that Dawn Butler, another Labour MP down in London, she was stopped in Hackney by police with apparently no good reason. And Sean Bailey went onto Twitter pretty quickly and said that this can't be racism. It's not, he's been stopped and searched and he didn't attribute it to racism. But actually, 2 years ago, he had been stopped and searched and he had gone on Twitter to say this is racism by the police. So I think there are some people who are going to argue whatever they think their voting public wants to hear. And yeah, it just makes it easier to... There's also an element of tokenism with some MPs where as long as they're towing the party line, then they're fine. But it doesn't seem to matter to them that they're throwing other people of colour under the bus. And then, yeah, with diversity targets, I can't remember the name of the MP now, but someone was asked recently about how many black members of cabinet there are. And he said, we have a diversity of thought. And yeah, that just, God, it's so beautiful because it just completely dismisses anti-black racism that happens. And yeah, I guess that's not something that our current government really need to think about because they're too busy with Brexit and selling off the NHS. But anyway, if we had equality of opportunity truly from day one, then we wouldn't need to have diversity targets. We could truly hire the best people for the jobs because more people would have access to those opportunities from when they were in school. Like, go all the way back to the schools that they attend, the support that they're given in those schools, the support that they're given with their homework, applying to universities. I have relatives who were told not to apply for particular universities because they'd be unlikely to get in. That's shit. That shouldn't happen. So yeah, if we corrected for those privileges earlier on, then actually, and those disadvantages earlier on, then we wouldn't need to have so many diversity targets now. And that's really that's the point of race, is that it does function to keep people within a system that is very difficult to escape from. There you go. There's an angry cat. Right. So, what's gone on historically? What function has race served? Why are hierarchies good? Well, if you're on top of the hierarchy, you get to be a dick. You get to control people, and you get to enforce your sense of what order looks like onto everyone else. Like your way of doing things, the way that works for you, is just everyone else has to go along with that. And that makes you feel good because you know that you're always going to be on top of that system. But for exactly the same reasons, that's why they're bad. if you're not at the top of that system, then other people are a dick to you. You don't have any control, you don't have any power, or the ways that you access those things are really limited and they're curtailed. Like, as soon as you attempt to do anything and you're dismissed routinely or told that you're exaggerating or all manner of things. I've heard it all. And yeah, there isn't one way of doing things right. There's so many different ways of achieving anything, that just enforcing one way of doing stuff doesn't work. And we can see all the time, particularly in our political landscape, how often that is abused. I like this question: how do we know where we sit within a hierarchy, and are we so sure? Particularly because a lot of people think that they're victimized, and maybe some people of colour do as well, more so than they are. I've got a few black friends who talk about racism in ways that I have never experienced. I have experienced racism, but it's nothing compared to some of the experiences, particularly my black male presenting friends have experienced. Like, yeah, I don't get stopped by police. I get occasionally followed around a shop, but only since I dyed my hair or when I used to have a shaved head. Like, you know, the colour of my skin doesn't impact me in that way. So we only really have experiences of things that are directly around us. So if you don't have any interaction with people who are different, or if it's just not where you are in your life right now, that you don't know what that's like, we don't necessarily know what our biases are going to be, and we can't really counteract that. So it's good to read, expand your reading options. Yeah, it felt like racism went away for a really long time. I think if you were white, that's how it looked. We had diversity targets after the Macpherson report came out in '99, talking about, you know, the police and institutional racism. Lots of things changed really quickly, and when the new Labour government were in power, they seemed to make quite a lot of changes, particularly to workforces, that implied that we were learning some things. But actually, for those of us who experience racism, it kind of changed from being impact-led to suddenly much more intent-driven. So casual racism became the norm. Everything was unintentional. If you spoke up about someone doing something racist, you were the one who was the problem, not the person who'd done or said something racist, because, well, they didn't mean it like that. And we're still seeing that now. Like, this has been the case for me for my whole life. You know, I have so many examples from secondary school where I was told off for just asking, is this a race thing? I don't know. I didn't understand why I got a C in geography, but A's in everything else. Like, geography is really fucking easy. But anyway. It could be racism. Maybe I was just shit at geography. I still know about coastal erosion in Norfolk. I don't need to know that. Anyway, I like this analogy. It's a bit like pushing a bookshelf in front of a mold patch on the wall when actually the mold is inside the walls. There's nothing you can do surface level. To fix this problem, you've really got to delve really, really, really deep. A lot of people like quoting Martin Luther King Jr. And at the moment, particularly around Black Lives Matter, saying that, you know, people should be more like him. He was peacefully protesting. Actually, no, they had him killed. And also, most of Black Lives Matter protests have been like really peaceful. All the community projects that are happening around the world, there's no news coverage of that. The news completely switched away from the rioting and the looting and the fires and things. As soon as that violence stopped, the news kind of went away and didn't really engage anymore. So we're really not getting the full picture at many levels of society. Here's a skeptical looking little puppy. Oh, look at the glasses. Love it. Right, so what's going on now? I put this together quite hastily, this little cycle, but I think I'm quite happy with it. So first of all, you have a resistance to whatever power it is. And you can see this in all different aspects of history, but right now we're talking a lot about decolonializing things in society, like bringing down statues and trying to reassess ways of working and how to decolonialize those ways of working. And then you have the marginalized group who will assert their own rights within that system, which is what we're doing right now. We want more rights here. We want to have equal opportunities, equal access, all of those things. So then those who have got the power, they've got a couple of options, but what typically happens is they want to fix a few things, but also at the same time kind of rework history so that it seems like they were going to do that all along. They just, you know, needed a reminder. Who was it that said, oh, it was Ben Shapiro. Yeah, content note, Ben Shapiro. He said America was always gonna fix like civil rights. They just, you know, they just needed to rewrite that bad check or something. Ugh, gross. But yeah, what this reworking of history does is it allows those with power to keep doing what they're doing. And I don't think we'd have the levels of like financial inequality that we seem to have right now if that wasn't possible, if they hadn't been doing that. So the cycle just keeps going round and round. Race still serves the same functions. We still have these pecking orders. We still have these really weird coded ways of talking about race. Like, what does it mean for someone to transcend their race? Why is it so hard to celebrate difference when actually we all love food from different cultures, and we all love jewelry and clothes and, you know, music from different cultures? We can all appreciate those things individually, but why does it seem that we have to constantly talk about celebrating difference? Like every 8 to 10 years, I feel like there are new conversations, new language popping up around this. It's the same thing. And then when people talk about dividing and conquering and a need for us to unite, it's really important to be clear who we're going to unite behind. And for me personally, I want to unite behind the people who are the most oppressed. So black people, trans people, disabled people. For me, those people who are on, and immigrants as well, who are fleeing like the most horrific situations in their home countries. I want to uplift those voices. I want to unite behind what they are doing, because fundamentally that sits very neatly within my core value as a good person, is to take direction from those people about what they need themselves. Is race still relevant? I mean, apparently, otherwise we wouldn't be having all of these arguments. But I don't want to do away with the whole concept of racism because with the whole concept of race, because I don't think we're quite at the point where we can just ignore it and then it goes away, because we're still seeing people being marginalised. And I'm pretty sure that if we didn't have racism, we would still have other ways of being treated unfairly and being put into these hierarchies. And I think now is a very good time to ask, in 2020, while most of us are at home, is to question who put these rich men in charge, and what is it going to take for us to start actually like adding more seats to their table, because they don't seem to want to do it on their own. So what do we need to do to put those seats there? There you go. Doggos against fascism. Oh, I like dogs too. What's in store for the future? I have my 3-point system for challenging racism. First, you have to understand what's going on behind it. Then you have to point it out to the person. I think this can be done in lots of different ways, but being direct is kindness. And then how to challenge it. And that could be correcting someone on it, or it could just be like helping them through it, because you might have gone through a similar like journey yourself. This whole section is basically me giving you some examples of stuff and then telling you how you can like address it when you see it in your own spheres. So I got this definition from Wikipedia. Dog whistle politics is using coded or suggestive language in politics to garner support from a wider audience for a candidate. Dog whistling serves the purpose of attracting the intended political audience without garnering ire with opposing audiences, similar to ultrasonic dog whistles used in sheep herding. There's an article in Vox, Vox.com, like all about this. It goes into detail of a few different types of dog whistling. So you've got semantic, which is like where there's kind of a coded language where nothing on the surface seems like it's incorrect, but there are kind of double meanings within it. So the example I've given here is the Wuhan virus. We know what they mean by Wuhan virus, but there's an additional context that is given with the word Wuhan that we associate it with China. Next is contextual, which relies on in-group knowledge. So I actually only just found out this one recently, but the word coincidence, when you talk about things being a coincidence, that's actually like a really big anti-Semitic red flag, which I just learned recently, and because I didn't have that in-group knowledge, because as far as I know, I'm not anti-Semitic, at least not deliberately. Next, we have stereotype dependent, and the example I've given here is strivers versus skivers. In the Vox article, it talks about welfare queens, and it's the stereotypes that you know about in order to take the meaning of this dog whistle. Next, I've got some fun examples. This is kind of keeping it light and bright and breezy. So the first one is a picture of Yoda, and it says at the top, "May the force be with you," and at the bottom it says, "and also with you." This is particularly funny if you were raised Catholic, because when you go to church, you have this thing where you make the sign of the peace, which is basically just handshaking. But the first person says, "May the Lord be with you," and then the next person says, "and also with you." And you have to do it like with everyone sitting around you, which I'd imagine is much easier these days with church numbers in decline. But yeah, it relies on you being Catholic to really understand the context of that. The next one here is a picture of a man who looks like he's Muslim. He's wearing a little white hat and he's got a beard and he's got dark skin. And at the top it says, "I can't stand the West." And at the bottom it says, "Borough Baptist Church. They really need to learn some tolerance." So here is where we're taking the stereotype of a Muslim man saying, "I can't stand the West." But actually he's saying something completely different. "I can't stand the Westboro Baptist Church." And then the next one is a semantic one, and this is there's a picture of a guy who's like hugging a ladder, and the caption is, "This is my step ladder. I never knew my real ladder." So the word "step" there has this double meaning, and like these are obviously not dog whistles; these are just some silly memes. But it's really hard to keep defining what dog whistling actually is, because it changes over time. Like there are discussions going on like online that I don't even understand. I've been at the receiving end of some dog whistling statements that I didn't even know while I was having the discussion. I didn't even know that someone was kind of being racist towards me, and it took a friend of mine who goes on to a lot of lefty activisty, like way more stuff than I do, who actually intervened and told this other person off. And yeah, that's how subtle these things are. Sometimes people are being racist to me and I don't even realise until someone else points it out. So how do you counteract it? So I've got my 3 major points. You understand the mechanism. So this could, if you're giving someone the benefit of the doubt, like maybe they got a point from, I don't know, let's say they read the Daily Mail, or or they got this something that seemed like it was legitimate, so they're just using a phrase and they didn't realise that was a problem. Actually, just asking them outright, "What do you mean by it?" Gives them an opportunity to, but like actually, they might not have any bad intentions there. It might just be a word that they've heard. So someone described it as the Wuhan virus, just go, "Oh, why do you say Wuhan virus when it's coronavirus?" They might not be aware that it actually has some negative connotations. But hopefully, once you point it out to them, they'll immediately kind of backtrack and go, "Whoa, I had no idea that it was," and then they won't use that word again. And sometimes it really depends here, but I think it's perfectly fine to say that you'd rather they didn't say racist things. I think that's perfectly appropriate. And it's also fine, I think, to challenge it sometimes if they dig their heels in, because racists do spoil things for everyone else. And if they retaliate and say that you're making something uncomfortable, why can't you just ignore it? Why can't you just let it go? You're not the one making things uncomfortable. They are. They were the one who said or did the racist thing. The next one is accidental or incidental racism, which is very similar to unintentional racism, but I've separated them out here because I think this is one where people are slightly more aware that they have done or said something wrong. So it's when something just slips out. So this is a GIF of, her name's Laura Ingraham, and she's a Fox News presenter, and this was her at a Trump rally, I think a couple of years ago now. But she was waving to the crowd and kind of did a Nazi salute. And there's been a lot of debate about whether she did this intentionally or not. But the fact that it's a dog whistle, because for the people who know, then they kind of know, oh, there's just something very creepy about it. And then I've also included Maria Sharapova and Serena Williams. Maria Sharapova has made quite a lucrative career out of overstating Serena Williams's physical traits. And now, as you can see from this photo, Sharapova is actually taller than Serena Williams, and yet in her memoirs, and she said publicly several times that how how much stronger Serena Williams is and how she's much bigger, when actually no, Maria Sharapova's tall. And also they're both really great tennis players, but Maria Sharapova has only ever beat Serena Williams once in something like 16 years. So you can kind of question why they do this, but I think it's telling that the things that she's saying about Serena Williams are implying that she's somehow subhuman, or that there's something that, you know, oh yeah, it's just gross. I think she's doing it a little bit deliberately. Then there's other things like acting on stereotypes. We've talked a bit about job applications already, and one of the reasons that artificial intelligence and facial recognition is so damaging is because of the data sampling that exists already. I don't think that any of the developers are deliberately racist, but if the data that they're sampling from has a racist bias in the way that it's gathered, say for example police using facial recognition, if they're deliberately stopping and searching black people at a much higher rate and then catching more black criminals than they are white criminals simply because of who they are targeting, then of course the data is going to skew towards having more black faces associated with criminality. But even in some cases, those water taps, the motion sensor water taps, they don't work for me ever. And yeah, I guess it's because my skin is sometimes the same color as like mood lighting. I don't know, but anyway, that's accidental, incidental racism. So when someone cocks up here, is that what they really think? And this is really telling how they respond to it, turning something from a "this is what you did" conversation into no, I am not like that, going from an action to an intrinsic value of the kind of person that they are. Which is really clever, and it sounds like it's quite difficult to counteract. I actually fell out with some friends recently who thought that I had called them racist when I didn't. I did not call them racist. They just shared like a racist picture, and I said, why did you do that? Didn't even use the R word once, but they got really freaked out that I had accused them of being racist, which I didn't even think. I'd been friends with them for like 10 years, but the discussion escalated so much that actually, they ended the friendship with me. I was like, well, let's just talk in a week, thinking we'll have some breathing space. But people can sometimes, the emotional labor of conflicting your core values with something that you've just done can be so great that it's actually easier for them to end the friendship with me than it was to like admit that they shouldn't have done that. So yeah, you can point it out to them, and I think I've said it here again, directness is kindness. When you challenge something, the sooner the better, because then it gives people a chance to unlearn things that they may have accidentally picked up along the way. Like, we're all born into this society that, that we're born into this hierarchy. It is so, it would have been so difficult for us to not have internalized some of those stereotypes and some of those things, even accidentally. So the sooner we can challenge these internally, the better. And then here's some more funny pictures. This is, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a quote, shaking my head, Martin Luther King didn't die for this. And then two like electric pencil sharpeners. One of them says no coloured pencils, and the other one says coloured pencils only. And then there's a salt shaker in the shape of a gnome, but when you turn it around, the two holes are like, makes it look like it's a clan member. And then in the third one is a photo of a supermarket with some Kellogg's cereal displays with the giant K logo 3 times. So it looks like it says KKK. That's totally accidental. So unintentional racism is when it's a genuine mistake and now the person feels really terrible. And this is, again, the impact versus intent. And another example of where you run the risk of causing further harm by bringing it up. So we all know that that wasn't their intention. That's a given. So you can point it out to them. My mum has this brilliant phrase, engage your brain before you open your mouth. Well, I don't always do it, but, we can all learn from that. We can all do our best to do that. I guess when something like this happens, if we've all made similar mistakes, so it's easier to be kind, hopefully. Some people find that really difficult, particularly if they're going through a lot. It's hard to be kind. And especially at the moment with all the stress of the whole world going on with the pandemic and with Brexit, it's harder to be kind right now. But yeah, we've all made similar mistakes. But I think it's important to have that awareness of impact, because if we don't know what the impact is, then we won't be able to address the intention, and it will just keep happening. And when it keeps happening, then you know that actually your intention is that, because you haven't done anything to change it. So here's some new slides that I just put in over the weekend. Is basically what to do when it happens ourselves. And there's a couple of ways to give a, well, this is a short version, and then I've got a longer version of what makes a good apology. But at its most basic, an apology is going to show that you're sorry, that it shows remorse for what you've done, and then it acknowledges how you've hurt that person. So that's the basic. This is a slide from Brené Brown with an interview with Dr. Harriet Lerner, and I've linked to her podcast in the slide notes. So for a true apology, it needs to meet these nine qualities. So it can't include the word but. It has to keep the focus on your actions and not the other person's response. It includes an offer of reparation or restitution that fits the situation. It doesn't overdo it, which can be stressful for the person receiving the apology. It doesn't get caught up in who's more to blame or who started it. It requires that you do your best to avoid a repeat performance. It should not serve to silence, to shut the other person up. And it shouldn't be offered to make you feel better if it risks making the hurt party feel worse. And it doesn't ask the hurt party to do anything, not even to forgive. That's a lot. But it's really good. I think you can probably reserve this for much bigger apologies that you need to make. But I guess for day-to-day, everyday stuff that happens, I think it's fine to just go along with the first two. So here's my two examples. Here's where a bad apology is. So someone said something racist and you've called them out, and then they say, that wasn't my intention. Here is a list of all the black people I know. I'm definitely not racist. I didn't mean it like that. And then quickly it can shift into, you're oversensitive. Not everything is about race. And then this one is more applicable to me, because sometimes when I haven't wanted to answer the question of where I'm from outside of Croydon, I know that the person is genuinely interested, but they don't understand that the subtext is just a reminder that I don't belong here. And I hate that, because I love Croydon and I love South London. And yeah, even if they're genuinely interested, if it was genuinely interested in me as a person, then me saying I'm from Croydon should be enough. Like, there's so many things you can ask about Croydon. Seriously, it's a wonderful place. So a better apology is just really short and sweet. Is, I'm sorry, I didn't make that connection, my bad, and I'm not going to do it again. Brilliant. Like, how revolutionary would it be if more apologies just looked like that? And if they meant it as well, just, I'm not going to do it again, or at the very least, I'm going to try not to do it again. I think that can be hard sometimes when something is really baked into your, like the way you move through the world. But if you start putting in that effort now, it's like having muscle memory. It gets better over time. And also, when you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. And those mistakes don't define us. You accidentally saying something racist doesn't make you a racist. It's what you do with that information and how you learn from it and how you grow. And like, are you actually learning, or do you just want the issue to go away? How do you make sure that you are genuinely learning this thing? And I've included so many resources in the notes. So yeah, hopefully you'll have lots and lots of places to go and read a lot more about this once we share the presentation afterwards. So when you have committed some unintentional racism, it's not about you. Even the apology has to come from you, but it is very much about the impact that it's just had on someone. It's kind of like if you accidentally step on someone's toe and you just keep doing it over and over again. You don't mean to, and neither of you have big feet. You're just not looking where you're going. So as long as you keep looking where you're going, I think that's fine. And yeah, fundamentally, we're all adults making choices. We get to control our actions and, direct our own feelings. And like, shame is a big part of that. I don't want us to feel shame to the extent that I think a lot of people do, that it's actually destructive. You get to feel bad about fucking up, but then you also get to fix it. I think that's really wonderful, and that's really important to keep in mind. So I guess, like, to sum up, the point of racism is to divide us into these hierarchies, and it's our job as good people to notice when it's happening and then challenge it. We have all been fucked over by this system, So when we look for it, we can challenge it, and then all of this goes into being anti-racist. I didn't really talk about emotion that much, but I think it's really crucial to bring this humanistic approach into it, that this is an emotional subject because it's something that is about people. This isn't, abstract ideas. Race might be an abstract idea to you if you don't think it's something that affects you, but actually it does affect all of us, and it's fine to be emotional about it. Also, when someone is speaking about their own experiences of racism, they might not speak about it in the most polite way because it's horrible to be at the receiving end of it. In the same way that sexism is horrible and homophobia is horrible and transphobia, all of these things are horrible. So when we dismiss a really good point because the presentation of it hasn't been perfect or hasn't been exactly as we want to receive it, then fundamentally we're just dismissing a really good point. So yes, then there's understanding it, pointing it out, and challenging it, which is like the key 3 things I want you to take away from it, and then how to apologise. Very much.
Thank you, Carl. That was fascinating and fantastic. And we're going to take a quick break now. I forgot to mention at the start, tonight, for the first time, we're going to do a little after the Q&A, we're going to have a Zoom meeting where people can come and chat. So we're going to post a link to that in the comments now tonight, so you can join in after we're finished. We'll take a 10-minute break now. Any questions you've got, you can pop them in the comments, send them through on email, Twitter, Facebook Messenger, however you want to send them, we'll find them and we'll come back to you in about 15 minutes time. Welcome back. We're now going to do our Q&A with Carmen. And I'm very sorry, I forgot to mention before the break, if you do want to send a donation tonight, we are raising money for the PBH Free Fringe, as they would normally be putting us on during the Fringe, and you can get that at paypal.me/freefringe if you wanted to donate. And think of all those times you've gone to a Free Fringe show and you've just put a few pennies in instead of real money, and make up for that by dropping them a tenner now. So, right, down to questions. So, first one is from our Twitter account. Just a comment. Carmen mentioned core values conflict. I was told our first thought is how we are conditioned to think. Our second thought is what we actually think. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I don't think that conflicts with what our core values are. Yeah, I think I think both of those things can exist at the same time. We're not ever in like one state of being. Yeah, that's a really great point.
So question from Jamie, just sort of in general, what are your thoughts on Angela Sarni's book about the return of race science and
I've got it. I've literally got it up here. I don't know if I can. It's dark now, but yeah. I love Angela Saini. She's another South London girl. She gave a talk for us at London Skeptics, and she's given a talk for another event that I co-run at Conway Hall. She's brilliant. Yeah, she really. I am embarrassed that I got my DNA test done a few years ago. Just because it's all bullshit, but I just wanted to be part of it, what looked like a new techie kind of thing. But yeah, Angela Saini's fantastic. She's if you haven't already, she's got two books. One is called Superior, that's about race, that I've got just up here, and then the other is called Inferior, which is I think about gender, and they're both really excellent. So yeah, Angela Saini, she's fantastic.
Our next question is from Flo, and she's basically just interested in what your views are on gender blind casting.
On gender what, sorry?
Oh, sorry, not gender blind, colour blind casting, but I guess gender blind as well.
Oh, colour blind casting. I don't know that much about it. It's not something that we have at the theatre that I work in, because we do mostly performance art, like queer performance art, and actually our key like focus is on queer, trans, intersex people of colour. So like that's who we kind of cater to in both our audiences and our performers. So that's not something that I know that much about. But yeah, I don't know about casting, because I don't know anything about acting, but I know that from when I used to work in the NHS, they take quite a lot of steps to be as unbiased as they can be. So, but it's also very easy to cheat that system. So they don't have names on applications that come in. It's just a list of qualifications. They also won't put things like any disabilities necessarily, or any age range on your CV. Like, it's not one of the questions that they'd ask you for a job interview, like to get to the stage of a job interview when they're shortlisting CVs. But there are ways around that. So even when you try and put measures in place to avoid those biases, they do still exist anyway, because we're all human, and and sometimes we like to favour our mates. I've seen that so many times in my career, of like people like just telling friends or other colleagues that they would prefer to get that job, what they would need to do in order to get through. So even with something like colourblind casting, I would imagine that there are ways that you could subvert it. Yeah, great question.
Well, I think if you're interested in a good discussion on that, Armando Iannucci did a lot of interviews when David Copperfield came out, because obviously it was a colourblind cast, and he was talking very much like he cast Dev Patel as David Copperfield because he just felt that was his energy. He always felt that he had this like vibrant energy that was just so representative of what he imagined David Copperfield being, that it doesn't matter that he's not white. It just didn't enter his head that would be an issue.
Great in that as well. He played the part as well.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Like, we saw it, and it wasn't ever an issue during the film. You just get so swept up in it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, obviously matters to some people, and I would question why that is.
So we discussed this in the break, but it's come through as a question. So what I asked about the coincidence thing, in terms of that being linked to anti-Semitism. So it's not that there's an etymology behind it that is anti-Semitic. You explain.
Yeah, so I actually have it up on my screen because we did talk about that in the interval. So there is a Chrome extension called the coincidence detector, or there was, it existed a few years ago. So the coincidence detector, it was eventually removed because it violated Google's hate speech policy, but it was allowed to continue for so long because it basically linked it sort of compiled and exposed identities of Jews and others who are perceived as anti-white, and then it linked the word coincidence with all of these examples, and it saved them in like a repository, and then it encased the names in 3 sets of parentheses, and it gives examples. And I've also linked to this in the presentation so you can read more about this, but there's an article in Mike.com that goes into the history of this and what happened, and yeah, it's quite terrifying. And also, when I did the practice run of this talk with some friends a week ago, a very good friend of mine who is Jewish, like a non-practicing secular Jew, she asked if I could talk a bit about dog whistling because it's something that happens all the time. And I left it out of the original presentation that I'd written because I didn't really think that I knew that much about it. But as we were talking, there are a lot of similarities. But yeah, the dog whistling and anti-Semitism are so intertwined. It's terrifying. But also, I think I mentioned it in the talk as well, that I've been at the receiving end of dog whistling racism and not even known because the coded language is so coded that, even me, who's an activist and, I consider myself to be fairly like well read on all of these things, even I don't know all the new terms, certainly at the moment. But yeah, coincidence detector, that's scary. I also read today, another thing that I didn't know is that My Little Pony has a really severe problem with white supremacists.
Yeah, the bronies are proper.
Yeah, bronies are racist. All bronies. But oh my gosh, yeah.
I'd heard about the 3 parentheses on Twitter thing, but I didn't know that was linked to the coincidence thing. So yeah, that's interesting. Right, from Sean, what do you think of do you think the idea of white working class as a demographic is useful?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you're interested in demographics and dividing people in order to be able to understand the way society works, then yeah, definitely. One thing I find really interesting is that when in mainstream media, we or they talk about the working class, it is often just assumed that the working class in this country is white, when actually most people of colour are also working class, but we don't really think of them. So there is an argument to be made that even the term working class is a bit dog whistly, and questions around how valuable that definition is still in 2020 because the nature of employment has changed so much, inherited wealth has changed so much, property ownership levels are changing quite rapidly within a generation. So it's interesting, it's interesting about whether working class itself is a useful term at the moment and whether it will be in the next sort of 10, 15, 50 years. But yeah, I think it's fine to break these demographics down as much as you need to in order to better understand them. I think there's definitely value in that.
I think there can be a bit of a dog whistle in it, though, especially when it becomes a defensive thing where they say something, you point out some, inequality, and then they go, but white working class boys are more, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh, yeah, but that's not the issue under discussion right now.
Well, there is that. And also, it isn't pie. Like when we talk about, it's not a finite, sorry, when I say it isn't pie, it's not a finite resource of, you only have so many slices of equality that you can hand out. Either we have equality of opportunity for everyone, or it's not equality of opportunity. And that's like really important to remember. And also people of colour are not calling for working class white people to stop getting, any benefits. It's like most of the time people just want equal access to those same benefits, and like for the gatekeepers to just, it's not a finite resource. I don't want to get too like loony lefty here, but you know, money is mostly held in computers. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, there actually isn't really any reason that I can see why we don't just like give people more money. It seems to all just flow upwards, and then inequalities get entrenched. And I do think that there has been a very deliberate effort in the last, well, maybe it isn't just 20 years, maybe it's for all time. I'm just been aware of it in the last 20 years, to pit working class people against each other, because there's more of us. So of course they want us bickering. Why wouldn't they? They can get more done if we're not looking at them, if we're looking at each other.
Yeah, I think that's definitely exemplified in this current government and all the corruption that they demonstrate. They are not interested in the best for everyone at all. They're just interested in the best of the few.
Oh, yeah, it was really disheartening to see. Well, I mean, it's always disappointing to see Preeti Patel in the news. But saying that there's never something good. Oh, poor Preeti Patel. She can never do anything right. She chooses not to, though. We're just adults making choices. But saying that she was going to send in the Navy to get rid of these migrants that are coming in. And I don't know that, I'm not a military person. I don't know what benefit the Navy will bring to this situation. But these are people fleeing for their life on a fucking rubber dinghy, trying to get into this country for their £37 a week to live on. Like, you know, just give them a go. Like, you know,
maybe not a great idea to greet people from a war zone with military personnel.
Yeah,
They might be a bit traumatized by that. Our next question from Sean Ellis kind of leads on from this more political discussion. In your experience, what effect has Brexit had on racism in the UK?
So my first, the day after Leave won, or it was announced that Leave won, I had my first experience of direct racism that I'd had in quite a few years, maybe like 3 or 4 years. That was the immediate aftermath. And I didn't know what was happening at the time. I did, because I was on my lunch break. I used to work in near Old Street, in central London, and I was on my lunch break, and I didn't know what I was going to have for lunch, and my mind was elsewhere. I was sort of, you know, I only had half an hour, so I needed to go out and get something and then go back to the office, and then I'm a project manager for a living, so my head is constantly, you know, multitasking. I've got several projects. They all have, you know, that's what was going on in my brain. And I was also thinking, like, oh, what do I want for lunch? I'm peckish. What do I want? And there were 2 women walking the other way past me as I was crossing the road, and one of them went, "Oh, it smells of curry." And my first thought was, where does it smell of curry? And then when I got across the road, I was like, oh, fucking hell. She was just saying that to be racist. Yeah, that was like the immediate aftermath. And then, I mean, nothing's got better. Literally nothing's got better. And I also think that Brexit is linked in with a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Like the general equalities that we're talking, I think it's all fractal, you know? Like things that are happening on the macro level are also happening on the micro level. People are losing work and losing income and losing interest, or, you know, having to pay more interest on, you know, their mortgages and, you know, their credit card debt, and all of these things are kind of all interlinked, and that's only been exacerbated by coronavirus, and it's only going to get worse when we do actually leave the EU properly without a deal. You know, but we can import our sugar, just like duty free or something, great, which we already grow here. So yeah, buy Silver Spoon, don't buy Tate and Lyle, buy Silver Spoon. But yeah, I think I think if anything, Brexit has probably widened the way that people are now racist, because it includes people who are European in a way that I don't think it really did before.
I don't know about that. Like, because my family is Ukrainian. My granddad was a first-generation immigrant, and he was tortured with abuse when he was working in like the 60s and 70s, like mid dog shit and told to go home all the time because he had a very thick accent. And there was a lot of Eastern European immigrants after the war, and they were all so yeah, I think there might have been a lull after that. But it's definitely not a new.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, I know that my family had a lot of issues in the 70s. That were quite horrible to hear, actually. There was some stuff that I didn't find out until I was an adult, and that's sensible for me to not have known those things. But yeah, I think most of the girls, I went to an all-girls school, so most of the girls that I went to school with were either of, there were a few Asians, like Filipinos and Indians, very small number of us. There are a couple of black girls in my year. And then the majority were either Irish or Italian, of Irish or Italian descent, or Spanish. So I grew up around lots of other like second, third generation immigrants who didn't seem to have the same issues with racism that I did. So yeah, I guess racism has just never gone away. We love it. We love racism.
Well, there's some breaking news which you might want to pass comment on, which seems relevant. Kamala Harris is confirmed as the VP pick.
Oh, really? Isn't she like really pro-police?
Yeah. I don't think it's a great idea, but because she used to be the Attorney General in California, so she was responsible for a lot of prosecutions of black criminals in California, so it's not a great record that she has on that front.
I'm really curious with people like that about what the utopia is that they're trying to build, because America's got like the largest prison population. I read somewhere the other day that America has got more people in prison in America than all of the other countries in the world combined.
We've got a visitor.
Oh.
Yes, I've heard that too. It's ridiculous, and obviously the majority of that is black as well.
Yeah, I wonder what Kamala Harris. I wonder what she feels the benefit is to putting that many people in prison, and like what her long-term goals are for that to continue doing that.
I think when it's that institutionalized thing, it's kind of so hard to overcome and buck the system when you're just one player. But it never seemed like she really tried that hard to even push the system a little bit. But if you've watched the 13th, that basically is We have one last question. It's much more lighthearted. So Sean wants to know, what is that skull on the desk behind you?
That is a skull. It's just a skull.
Okay, it has no purpose.
I have two skulls here. I like skulls.
My face mask is skulls, which I realise isn't great for a pandemic.
Yeah. I'm just a bit of a goth.
Yeah, I get that.
So yeah. Oh, actually, I've got a book recommendation.
Oh, fair enough.
I've got a book recommendation. This is This is like such an uplifting book. So there's loads of other recommendations for further reading, and most of that is quite serious. But I'm reading this at the moment. It's called How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. And if you like science fiction and fantasy, it's so good. It's just these really sweet little short stories about random little things in the future. It's such a lovely book. So yeah, so How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. I really if you want to read something just utterly delightful, I recommend it. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating evening chatting. We're going to head over to Zoom now. Are you joining us there?
I might join on my phone because I need to heat up my dinner because I haven't eaten.
No, if you're not had tea yet, that's urgently required. But thank you very much. And if people tonight, they can do that again. Like I say, paypal.me/freefringe. The link to the Zoom chat should be in the comments on YouTube now for you to join us. And we'll see you again next week for John Curtis for the polling. Are we moving towards independence in Scotland? I hope so. But we don't have a political view here at Edinburgh Skeptics. My personal opinion is I hope so. And we'll see you then. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.